Welcome once again to Ask Chuck webcast. We're in between issues here in the United States Senate, and I'll discuss those with you in just a minute. But I thank you very much for joining us, and those of you who sent questions, I thank you very much for your questions. And what we don't answer verbally, we'll answer in writing. So thank you, whether you Facebook, whether you email, or whether you tweet questions to me, thank you very much. From Facebook, Timothy in Cedar Rapids asks, what are your thoughts on the two federal judges ruling Obamacare to be unconstitutional? One of the reasons I voted against the Obamacare bill, along with all of my Republican colleagues, is because of the individual mandate. In other words, for the first time in the history of the federal government, unlike the state government, this is the first time the federal government's ever said under the Commerce Clause, you have to buy something. And quite frankly, I don't know where you start. If the federal government under the Commerce Clause says you have to buy health insurance, then what's the next thing they're going to say you have to buy? So I think it is unconstitutional, and I'm glad these two federal judges said it's unconstitutional, and hopefully the Supreme Court before long will say it's unconstitutional. Then we'll start over and do it right. So obviously I agree with them, and thank you very much for that question, because that question is right at the central of what is either constitutional or unconstitutional about this bill. And if that provision of the individual mandate is unconstitutional, probably the whole bill will go down and start over at that point. Chris says that he's a UNI graduate. He tweets, any chance that the Senate will pass the House 1099 repeal bill? It has passed the Senate, but there are different versions of the bill that it's attached to in conference between the House and Senate. I believe those differences will be worked out, and I believe 1099 will be repealed. Let me give you an editorial comment on that. You know, this perfect piece of legislation that Obama said the health care reform bill was, it's kind of astonishing, isn't it, that the president would say 1099 ought to be repealed. Hopefully it's the beginning of a lot of things in this bill that will be changed. I give you a report on what's coming up this week. We're going to have the patent reform bill probably be finished this week, and I'm the ranking Republican on the Judiciary Committee, so I'm managing that bill for the Republican members of the Senate. After that, we will have competing versions of how you get the budget deficit under control. You have the House bill that I think most Republicans in the Senate will support, that would reduce spending by $61 billion. You have President Obama and the Democrat bill that would reduce spending by about $6 billion. Where this goes from this point, but I assume that neither one of those bills will get the 60 votes required, and that we'll start some sort of negotiation to find common ground on what we can do. But I personally think that the situation is so bad with the national debt being tripled, and that tripling started just within the last 2 years, because you see, for 50 years the gross national product, the debt to the gross national product was about 35%. Today it's at 65, it's on a path to go to 90. That's why I say in the last 2 years, tripling of the national debt. We have to intervene on that immediately, and intervening at the 2008 level of expenditures and freeze for 5 years. Whereas the president wants to freeze at the 2010 level of expenditures and freeze it for 5 years. The freezing for 5 years might say that we're not very far apart, but there's a big difference between 2008 level of expenditures and the 2010 level of expenditures, because there's been a 22% increase in the last 2 years, and that 22% increase is just many times the normal 4 to 5% increase you might have in expenditures. And it just can't be sustained. So I'm looking forward to having the 2008 level and freezing for 5 years. I hope we can bring the president around to that point of view, although I think it's going to be very, very difficult because he and members of his political party believe that government ought to spend more money and the taxpayers spend less. Well, we'll just have to see how that comes out. I would appreciate next week your questions again, and thank you very much for participating.